Hey everyone, I am Robert with AWS, and I am at the first ever Inforce conference here in Boston, the best city ever. I'm joined by my special guest, Bridget Johnson. Bridget, please introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Bridget Johnson. I am on the AWS Identity team. You may have seen me talking about IAM policies at reInvent before, but today I'm here to talk about permission guardrails with AWS organizations.
Awesome. That is a very interesting topic because I think the concept of guardrails is really interesting, right? Because when anybody starts using AWS, they feel like a kid in a candy store. Everything is available to them. Everything. I can just spin up infrastructure on demand. That's insane. I'm going to go set up a VPC here and a security group here and an EC2 instance here. And next thing you know, I have this sprawling infrastructure. That's great, right?
It is great, except for those security-focused individuals who want to make sure you don't mess anything up, right? So maybe you don't want to go to that region or mess with that network setting, you know? So we're going to talk about how you can use permission guardrails.
Okay.
I'll help those security folks out who are trying to manage the crazy developer, excited developer.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that we want to go for is the balance between being able to move quickly, having that agility and the flexibility, those core promises of cloud computing, but they have to be done in a secure way, right? I think it's really reckless when we go and say, oh, we're excited, we're carried away, we love building stuff, and then at the end, we're building a product that is not secure for the customer. That's just a headache all around, and I think this is one of the themes that I really like about Inforce so far is that there's this concept of let's stop thinking about it as something that we tack on, some process that is added after the fact.
It's incorporated.
It has to be embedded in the whole thing. So I'm excited to hear what you have to...
Yeah, and just to your point before, right, we talked to a ton of customers. They're like, I want to give developers freedom. I want to give them agility. And then they give me this big but. I want to prevent dangerous actions or make sure they don't go to that specific region. And so there's this balance. And what permission guardrails allow you to do is set up things you don't want to happen in your organization and then give those developers the freedom. And then we're going to give you some data to help you wean it in over time. So if they don't use something, you can take that away, that permission away too.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, I did want to introduce myself a little bit. So if you remember anything about this presentation, remember that I have a horse. His name is Pickles. He shows up throughout the presentation. So I'm going to skip over that, but at least it's something fun to remember.
It's a beautiful horse.
Thank you. So I want to cover a couple things about organizations. So organizations lets you essentially govern your environment as you grow, right? So more and more customers are moving more workloads to AWS, which is great, and they want to build new workloads or move existing workloads, and they're creating new accounts to do this. And as you create new accounts, you don't want to manage one individually. And so this is where orgs comes in, right? You can group your accounts into different OUs and separate them based on how you want your organization controls to play in. And so you can do everything from make sure CloudTrail is always turned on, set these permission guardrails. There's a lot of fun things you can do with organizations. So if you haven't checked out orgs recently, there's a ton of functionality out there. We're adding more every time. Please go check it out and see what you can do. There's a lot of great stuff there.
So you mentioned organizations, and if you're an enterprise and let's say you have some on-premise infrastructure and the way you manage permissions and certain actions that are allowed or disallowed is with group policies through Active Directory, does that transition well to this concept of organizations that we have here?
So when you talk about organizations, we've seen a couple models work, and it depends kind of the scale that you're at. But when people think of organizations, one mistake that they commonly could make is that, hey, I want to essentially mimic my business units onto organizational units. And that's not necessarily the right answer. And so what we've seen work is there's different models. So what we're trying to guide customers to is, hey, go put like things together. together. So typically, like things might be your production accounts. Put those in an OU versus your dev accounts, right? So you're going to make sure that those production accounts are very scoped, maybe to the region, or maybe they'll all have a specific admin role, etc. Whereas your developer accounts, maybe they're even further scoped, and your instance sizes will be scoped to just smaller and all that sort of stuff. So that's one way to go about doing it. The other way we've seen for smaller organizations is to actually do on the per business unit. Like you'd have Team Pickles, or you can have Team Bubbles, or Team Zombies. You see all these in my demo, so that's why I'm using them. But and do it that way, and so they can manage their own accounts within that OU. But the minute that you want to put tighter controls and put like accounts together, that's when you'd have to move them.
Interesting. So what I'm hearing is that it's not necessarily a mirror of the organization. You have to actually go in there and take a look at what the roles are allowed to do functionally. So there's sometimes the function does not necessarily mirror the organizational structure.
Right. So most likely, if you have two teams, most likely their production accounts you're gonna want similar controls on their production accounts than you do on just that team, right?
Yeah.
And you may, change it up based on type of, maybe a mobile app versus a machine learning backend type of thing. You can have OUs within OUs, but yeah.
So other than kind of blindly copy-pasting the structure and trying to reproduce the organization structure, what are some of the other common mistakes that people make when they're undergoing these kinds of migrations? They're used to doing things on-premise in a certain way. They're starting to use AWS. What are the common mistakes that you see?
And this is actually where permission guardrails comes into play, right? Is a lot of times people bring their accounts, they put them in OUs, and then they just say, all right, we're just trying to get people to move, so we're going to start with really broad permissions. And I would recommend that you start with at least some things you know you don't want to happen, or you only want an admin to do, right? So there's pretty powerful things that you can do in AWS. You could open up a bucket, or you can change a networking setting, etc. And those are things you want to say, hey, trusted admin, maybe that's Bridget, then you're allowed to do this, and not everybody else is.
Yeah. So this goes back to kind of the principle of least privilege.
Yep.
And that's a security best practice in general, and we've heard that talked about throughout the conference. So can you talk a little bit about that and how it applies to guardrails?
What we're starting to talk about with least privileges is, before when we didn't have guardrails, you had to achieve least privilege on day one. And that was hard because you're new and you're in a candy shop and you don't know what candy you want yet, and you're playing with things and trying to see which database works for you. What are you going serverless? Or are you going to do instances? And you're playing around. And so what we're trying to do, and what we are doing, is treating least privilege as a journey, right? And so you can put these permission guardrails on your accounts, let people play, and then give them some general permissions, let them go, and then we'll give you the data to dial it in over time. And those three combined are very powerful, because then you can achieve least privilege, but not hinder developer progress.
So I just want to touch on that another point there. When we put these guardrails in place, by default, they are saying these are the limits of what I want you to be able to do on a given account. And let's say you give that account to an engineer in the organization, and one of the limitations you've placed on it is, we shouldn't be spinning up resources in this other region yet. We haven't talked about that. We don't know what that looks like. But as part of the autonomy and the initiative of this software engineer, they go and they say, I want to spin up something in this region. They run into this permission the permission block.
Yeah.
What happens then? Can you solve that in an automated way, or is that a human process from there?
They would have to go to their administrative team, because obviously their central administrative team does not want that to happen, right?
Yeah.
And so then you would have to go have that conversation of what's your business use case for it, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so that's just a good block to kind of have in control. Yeah.
And that's exactly what you want, right? That's not an automated decision that we want a policy that's like, oh yeah, if new resource being spun up in region, and if developers have tried this more than 20 times, let it go.
No, we don't want to let it go, right?
Yeah.
We want to go have a conversation, and the admin can always update the policy and add that region if that's where they need to be.
Which I think is another very interesting thing, because a lot of these security practices, a lot of these security policies, they end up becoming this hybrid of like technology, automated enforcement, automated response, and humans. Humans are always part of this. They're this
There's a lot of
ever-present part
judgment
of
that
this.
goes into it. And what we hear a lot is some use cases, and I wanted to go through them. We talked a lot about the region one, right? But another thing that we see is that people, customers set up all of these accounts, and they want to have some sort of audit or security audit, or, hey, this is a security role that can actually make changes to your networking setting. And so what you can do with permission guardrails is that you can prevent teams from deleting that role. And that's really powerful because sometimes teams will accidentally delete that role if somebody had admin within the account. But now you can put a guardrail on it that says, deny delete role for this specific role, and that's very powerful. And then also the instance types, this kind of comes into play when we talk about development versus production, and you don't want some developer being like, I need the biggest instance ever on the weekend in development when I'm just playing with some sort of little application.
I need an i3 instance for dev testing.
yeah. And it just kind of puts some guardrails on you, make sure you go in the right direction. And then prevent users from changing or disabling config rules. A lot of customers are using config rules for compliance, and so you don't want somebody being able to change that because that could essentially change your compliance output. And lastly is prevent IAM principals from making certain changes. We talked about like the networking changes or opening a bucket, except for that admin role, which is the admin role you didn't let people delete.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've never deleted an admin role by default.
Sometimes
accident,
you just clean.
right?
It just happens. So that kind of puts all the things in play. And then the security's like, why can't I assume the role? And they come knocking on your door and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. Cool. So I was going to run through a demo. Is that cool?
That is very cool.
I like showing things.
Demos.
We'll see if it works.
I think everyone likes demos.
Yeah. So this is a demo I have. This is my organization. It's pretty small just because I'm doing a tiny demo. I have a unicorn OU and a zombie OU. This was my creativity last reInvent. I love zombies and Walking Dead, so that's where it came from. I also like unicorns because I like horses. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a service control policy on the primary account, which impacts all the accounts under it. And I'm going to deny unapproved regions. Do you know what regions I'm going to only allow?
What regions are you only going to allow?
What regions are the best regions? No, just kidding. All regions are good
US
regions.
East is obviously the best region.
Well, that was somebody's first love. I overheard that upstairs. Somebody said US East 1 was my first love. And I was like, okay. Wow, that was intense.
Yeah.
But I'm only going to allow the West Coast because West Coast, best coast.
I see how it is.
Yeah, I like the West Coast. We're pretty cool. We have fun.
I'll let the demo run for now.
Yeah, all right. Don't change it. So I'm going to go through my SCP, that's a service control policy that actually applies to all of the principals, including root in your account. And then I'm going to go on the member account and poke around in Secrets Manager. If you don't know about Secrets Manager, it's great. It lets you turn any long-term credential into a short-term credential by rotation. And you can schedule rotation, you can rotate immediately, and then your code can just pull the latest secret. So you never have to use sticky notes and all that sort of stuff. So Secrets Manager is super cool. And then I will try to create something in an unapproved region, but you're going to watch me fail on number 3 because it's not approved.
Okay, let's see it.
All right. So I am in organizations. This is the AWS organization console. And you can see I have a couple policy types like don't delete the role, deny unapproved regions. I'm actually going to look at this one. Oops. I'm going to go to the policy editor. And for all those JSON lovers out there, it is the IAM policy language. And so you can see I have deny secrets manager lambda EC2 for string not equals. So this is everything but US East 2 and US East 1. And that's a very powerful condition key, AWS requested region. It works across all services. So that's fun. And I would like to show you that this policy is attached to the root. So I could detach it, but it's attached currently. Okay, so you can see my accounts in here. It's the same account structure I walked through before. In Firefox, I'm going to be the developer, so I'll mimic you maybe, right?
Okay.
So I'm a developer. I'm in the Zombies development account. I am currently on the West Coast, Oregon, great town, or great state. They got good beer and all the things. And you can tell that I can actually go in and see things. I can see this. I could even rotate. Here we go. Great. I just rotated my database password. Life's great.
And so this applies a policy where the credentials are only good for a certain period of time before they have to be reset, right?
Yeah, that's with Secrets Manager, right? So those rotate every 30 days, but I just rotate it immediately. Maybe somebody has them or whatnot. And so I'm going to try to switch up the region. Let's go to Ireland. Also good beer, but so we'll go to Secrets Manager in Ireland, and you can see that I cannot see anything because all of it's denied. And I'm admin in the account right now. So even your local admin who has full access isn't able to use the region because we put that control at the top.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is really cool. So this way you don't accidentally log in with the wrong region and you spend a bunch of resources and they get lost and then
and then somebody has to go and delete them and you get to pay for them and all that sort of stuff. This just basically prevents me from creating a secret in this region.
I mean, I see this as being valuable beyond security. This is also just kind of keeping everything in order, keeping everything observable. It could be used for cost control, because if you're talking about instance types or even regions have different prices, and so that's one way that you can do that. And honestly, regions are really important today in today's world, so people are very cautious about what regions they operate in, and this helps. Definitely. And do you see customers interested in these features for these kinds of reasons beyond just security, like the cost management, the observability?
It's usually just any type of business rule that you want to implement. I did want to show one more thing, which I kind of forgot, was in the IAM console, you can actually go look at your organization activity here. And so by default, once you turn on orgs, you get a default SCP, and that's allow star, everything. And that doesn't mean that everyone has full access. It means that it basically honors the permissions within the account, right? So all of your IAM policies just work with no restriction. Now, you can go to that, and I can show you here all my SCPs. This is the full access, is the one that's on by default. And I can navigate through and see when I last used certain services. So you can see I'm in the dev account a lot these days because I got a couple of demos to do here at Reinforce. And but if you kind of scroll through, maybe I need to go a little bit further. This is not access in the tracking period. So for example, I haven't used Amplify or Artifact, and you can kind of go through, or code commit. So it hasn't been used in the last year. So you could probably imagine that I could remove that access pretty confidently because no one's used it, and I could use that data to help me set the SCP.
Yeah, and I assume that all of this is also accessible through the SDK, so you can programmatically script this thing, you can run batch jobs on it, you can look for things that you definitely don't want, even if somehow something makes it through the permissions that you set.
Or you can grab it and then see what you used that was new that you don't normally use and all that sort of stuff.
That's awesome. So can you, as I'm seeing this, I see how powerful this is all is. Do you have any recommendations for kind of what is the process to kind of keep these things up to date? Because I imagine this is a living document. The requirements of the business change over time. We have the example of expanding to regions. So obviously there's a process that somebody has to go and change this. What are some of the models that you've seen for dealing with that kind of ongoing change?
So the typical model that we see is people denying things that they don't want to happen, right? And so as they come up with new business rules, compliance rules, security rules, they would add to those deny checks. And that seems to work out the best. You could do an allow where it's a whitelist for services and actions, and then you would have to whitelist. So, this morning, I bet if you're operating in that model, a lot of admins are whitelisting a bunch of new features that just came out. But that's kind of the best practice to start with.
Well, let me ask the question another way. Hypothetically, let's say, I'm a mid-sized enterprise, I've just moved to AWS, all this stuff is new to me, I'm following the best practices in the docs, and I've set these cascading permissions to restrict access to enforce the principle of least privilege. And what I'm getting is, my engineering teams are constantly coming back and asking for more permissions, and it's really slowing down the pace of innovation. What is the human process that I can use?
And so that's where I would actually start a little bit broader, right? And you can kind of say, okay, these are the services that we think you're going to use. And then what you can do is you can use this service last access activity to say like, oh, hey, you haven't used this in the last year. Now I'm going to remove it. Or, maybe your threshold is 90 days. That seems to be pretty typical. And you can script that, right? And some people don't like to remove permissions automatically because that could be dangerous without some human interaction, but at least say like, hey, we think you should remove this
Yeah.
because you haven't used it in a while. And I think that's the start a little bit broader, but make sure the things that you really care about, like CloudTrail and config rules and that admin role,
Yeah.
are protected.
Yeah, and that's where I really need to plug the SDK more. I think the SDK is this drastically overlooked aspect of AWS in general. I mean, a lot of these demos that we do,
Yeah.
they're through the console, but all of this is accessible through APIs.
Yeah.
So for example, everything that we were talking about here of like denied permission requests,
Yeah.
we can scrape that through the API, we can look for that, we can file trouble tickets in a separate system that's entirely outside of AWS.
And
then
there
we can have
are
like
tons of partners building tools or
Yeah.
even customers building tools on
Right.
top of that. And that's the power of AWS, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
we give
exactly.
you some of the building blocks, we provide some of the more management services, but there's always a customer that's building something
Yeah.
that's super passionate about, scoping down permissions.
Yeah, or making that process of permission reviews as seamless as possible so
Yeah.
that you don't have one unfortunate person just stuck there reviewing,
Yep.
approve.
Right.
That's
or
not good either,
you can kind
right?
of give that approval
yeah.
person some insight, so it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
challenging. Yeah.
Definitely. And I really like the point that you brought up, which is that these solutions are really only possible with the cooperation of our partners. They're the ones who are doing a lot of the heavy lifting and adding a lot of these innovative features. So.
Yeah, partners are pretty cool.
Yes.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for the demo.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for spending your time with us. This was a blast. I learned a lot, and we will see you later.
Bye. Thank you.